We'll start today with the federal government's expected deficit spike. The Prime Minister has already signaled the size of the deficit will be, quote, substantial due to the economic impacts of our trade war with the U.S.
Mark Carney's biggest problem is not the trade war with the U.S. or the rising Canadian conservative movement or even ostriches. No, because Mark Carney's real problem and therefore biggest challenge that will cripple his administration is the insane deficit gift that Trudeau gifted him just before he left. Because what I'm about to show you is that what happened to Trudeau will happen to Mark Carney as well. As always, I show you exactly what everybody's saying and I give you the news that actually matters.
The interim Parliamentary Budget Officer this week is sounding an alarm over just how substantial, Jason Jakes is projecting the Liberals will post an annual deficit of $68.5 billion this year, up from $51.7 billion last year, and that the federal debt to GDP ratio will increase over the medium term and remain above its pre-pandemic levels.
It's not a funny fiscal outlook. It's a really serious fiscal outlook. And we don't lightly use the word unsustainable, right? Unsustainable means you don't have the option of saying, maybe I'll wait a couple of years, I'll see how things go. It means if you don't change, this is done.
Now, there were very key words used here. Not sustainable, and this is done. This is not a joke at all. While Canadians are asleep at the wheel protesting about things that are happening a million miles away in terms of geography and, quite frankly, in time, the single largest looming threat to this country and your livelihood is literally right around the corner. And technically, the largest single threat to Mark Carney's administration will come to fruition in a lot faster than you think. The insane spending and downright theft of our tax dollars, which is caused by the Liberal government and its supporters, is why we are in this mess and is why Mark Carney's administration will not survive this controversy. And you're going to see why in a little bit. But let's break down what the Parliamentary Budget Officer says just after.
Is Jason Jakes. Hi, Mr. Jakes. Good to have you back here in studio. I appreciate you making the time.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
Our audience would just have heard a little snippet right now of what you told committee this week about the fiscal outlook that you presented. You said it's not a funny fiscal outlook. It's really serious. Why did you say that?
Well, this is in the report we clearly indicated that based upon the path we're currently on, by our estimates, it raises significant concerns with respect to the sustainability of federal finances.
What does that mean in layman's terms? I'm asking because we hear that word a lot from economists, particularly when we're talking about deficits or balanced budgets, you know, what and what isn't sustainable. When you say that you have concerns about the sustainability of our financial picture here in this country, like what in layman's terms does that mean?
I think certainly from our perspective, we're at the precipice. So we haven't gone over the precipice, we're kind of looking out over the cliff at this point. And we're at a point where, based upon our numbers, things cannot continue as they are. And I think everybody knows that, right? So what we've done is we've taken what everybody's feeling in terms of the anxiety across the country at this point, positive economic growth that doesn't necessarily feel very good, and we've actually put numbers around it with respect to the federal government's deficits over the next 5 years. And for us, it's really important to set the table for parliamentarians so they know what to expect, so they have a better sense of the overall context within which they're going to be presented with Budget 2025.
So what's at stake at the precipice? Like, if you fall over the cliff, what's there? If you're able to go the other way, what's there?
Well, obviously, you don't want to go over the precipice. That's probably...
Like, what happens, though, if you do?
Nothing good.
Nothing good. He is the Parliamentary Budget Officer, and he's saying that if they don't make radical changes immediately, nothing good will come out of it. And what nothing good means for your life and my life is a government desperate for cash flow. A desperate government has always and will always resort to major austerity cuts, which again is a result of not only the insane spending that Trudeau and his liberal criminals, who by the way are still in office, have done, but it's actually also because of a changing world order that you need to know and that we will get into after I show you what the IMF said back in 2024 about how austerity cuts are going to affect our lives and how they're going to play out in the very, very near future. So Inkstick Media wrote this article where they're kind of summarizing what the IMF's orders are and what the IMF's major predictions are for what's called the Global South. And that basically means countries that are more manufacturer heavy, are developing nations, and Canada doesn't really fit in this. But this article talks about how the IMF is saying governments that are drowning in debt, no matter if it's global south or north, will experience austerity cuts across the board. And that means the public sector will be squeezed, government assets will have to be sold, and regular people like you and I will have to carry the load. That means higher consumer prices, slowing of job creation, if there even is any, fuel, transit, and power subsidies are all cut. But what is very interesting is that this article clearly states that if the government doesn't tax the rich clearly, and also in the same breath protects basic subsidies for the people, then federal governments drowning in debt like our own will collapse. In other words, should Canada not follow a very narrow path of clear economic priorities, then this country's federal system will not survive. But what does narrow mean and what does it look like? Our CTV correspondent somewhat defines this. Let's take a look.
The more immediacy, though, as far as impacts on both the economy and what you're looking at, the fiscal outlook. And I ask because in response to some of your analysis, for example, the federal finance minister focused on, look, we're kind of in an emergency, I'm paraphrasing, but we're going to need to provide certain supports and ensure that our economy can withstand that. I sort of interpret that as, we will have to spend more than we would have liked to, let's say, because we have to address the imperative that this trade war with the United States has created and the sort of shock factor to our economy. How much wiggle room do they actually have to do that in your view?
It is a very narrow path. It's a very narrow path, and it's going to require both consideration of shifting spending within the federal government, in addition to reducing spending or potentially cutting programs in some areas, as well as potentially some consideration around increases in revenues, in order to make sure that the Canadian economy, Canada, is actually able to navigate that very narrow path.
If I try to understand that in sort of layman's terms again, does that mean that, essentially they can't just add those emergency measures? They're going to have to take something away.
In order to be sustainable and reduce certainly the anxiety we have in the office, and I think provide a certain amount of comfort both to other members of Parliament, other parliamentarians, Canadians writ large, there's going to have to be some sort of substantial change at this point. I think for myself, I always think of it the best analogy being, you go into your doctor's office, you've had a bunch of tests in advance, your doctor sits you down and she says, yeah, well, there are a bunch of bad indicators on your blood and other bodily fluids, and if you continue everything you're doing right now, you're not going to end up in a good place and not where you want to be. So you need to make some lifestyle changes at this point. And for the federal government, potentially it's going on a bit of a diet in terms of some areas of spending. Potentially they want to bulk up on the defense side and expand those areas. And potentially they also want to consider, taking on additional hours at the office so they can increase their revenues all at the same time.
Do you mean new taxes?
I guess we'll see. There are multiple options with respect to revenues.
The previous government gifted Mark Carney this curse. And make no mistake, the previous Trudeau regime absolutely set the stage for this country's economic collapse and crisis that we are seeing currently. Trudeau's popularity collapsed and was therefore humiliatingly ousted from his own party. And it was not because of immigration or crime or whatever, but it was actually because of the fall economic statement that he kept trying to delay the release of. And that actually resulted in Chrystia Freeland's first resignation. Very interesting that a famous politician can have multiple resignations. And if you need a refresher, let's get in the time machine, let's go back 9 months, and let's take a look at what happened.
I want to get your take on the timing when the fall economic statement is supposed to be tabled today, later this afternoon, and this comes out this morning in an open letter to the Prime Minister. Can you speak a little bit about what these optics look like?
Well, the resignation of the finance ministers the day of the fall economic statement, which is already months late, seems designed for maximum impact. It certainly is very destabilizing. And it sounds like the differences between the prime minister and his finance minister are not just differences, but hostilities. This is extremely damaging to the government. However, it was the prime minister who asked for the resignation of the finance minister. So it is, in fact, the prime minister who has triggered this.
History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme, because Mark Carney's fall economic statement is tabled for November 4th. And trust me, it is outrageous enough that Carney is literally getting his Parliamentary Budget Officers to start media tours to prep the public about how insane this whole thing might be. This coming fall economic statement is labeled as Budget 2025, and it will spark massive outrage within Parliament and within the Canadian people. I will guarantee you resignations, more controversies, and best of all, fighting chance for Pierre Poilievre to come and finally be our deserved prime minister. But all of that aside, what do you think? Can Mark Carney even survive this? Are Canadians too busy with their day-to-day lives to even care about this? Have you or your family or friends have shown any concern for this lately? I want to see what your thoughts are, because I'm going to reply to everything. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because supporting your favorite conservative creators in Canada is way more important now than it has ever been before.